Okay, Jim, we are up on YouTube, so you can wave at YouTube. Hi, YouTube. We're getting ready to sound check, Jim.
Sounds good. Check one.
Very good. And you look good up on the call recorder.
Thank you.
So 5 seconds of quiet. Today, we have Jim Collison, the home gadget guy, calling in from Omaha, Nebraska. Actually, he's Skyping on Omaha, Nebraska, and we're doing both a podcast and a YouTube. So, Jim, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Bill. Great to be on.
So we're not sure what the show is. It's really Podcaster's Home, but we're going to flip it over into timelines because it's going to be a little combination of both. So let's start by talking about you, what you do, and why you're in podcasting.
Yeah, actually, so what I do is really different from my podcast stuff. So today I'm a Gallup employee here on the riverfront in Omaha, Nebraska. So I work for Gallup. I'm an IT manager. I also have kind of started and built all their college and high school internship programs. So I spent around technology because I do technology recruiting as well. I go on the road about 6 weeks a year to go to local universities and some Maryland and Dallas and such. But we're really looking for the best technology students to come back to Omaha and work for us. So I spend a lot of my time doing that. About 5 years ago, I got into this thing called podcasting. I was hearing it was just starting to get really hot. Those were the days of John C. Dvorak and those guys with Cranky Geeks. And that was kind of my introduction to podcasting. And I thought, man, I want to do that. And so I looked around and I didn't actually start podcasting by myself. I actually joined somebody's show. So I listened to a podcast and I wrote the guy and said, it was Dave McCabe over at Home Server Show. And I said, man, I'd love to, if you ever want to do an interview with me, I'd love to just be on one time. And he said to me, well, I've kind of got a plan and I'll get back to you. And I didn't hear from him for months and my heart was broken. And he finally contacted me one April and said, Jim, you want a podcast? And he invited us on. We haven't stopped. That was like show 40 and we are on show almost 300 at this point. So I was bit by podcasting and I love doing it. It's one of those kinds of things. I love it so much I took it to work. So 2 years ago, Gallup started letting me webcast. We call it webcasting because nobody at work knew what a podcast was. I'd say podcast and they were like, what? And we said, how about webcast? And they're like, oh, yeah, I know what that is. And so we rebranded it inside the organization as a webcast, and that's worked really well. And so I get the opportunity at least once a week, sometimes two, sometimes three. I get an opportunity to webcast at work around our Strengths Finder product into our Strengths community. And so it's awesome. I mean, it's great to be a podcaster. I do a couple shows on my own. I have a Home Gadget Geeks one that I do. That's kind of the flagship show. We do one called Cyber Frontiers. I'm on Saturday mornings with Dave Jackson on Ask the Podcast Coach. Wednesday nights, either Surface Geeks or Home Server Show. And then at Gallup, we have one called Called to Coach. That's for our coaches. We have one called Theme Thursday that we do. And then I do a bunch of interviews and strength spotlights and stuff. So you say I'm probably pretty busy doing podcasting.
So at Gallup, who does all your editing?
Well, that's great. When we first started, I did, which was a lot of work, but we actually have audio video guys that work for us and that's all they do. So it's awesome because I have an editor that does my blog post for me. So at Gallup, I literally sit down and schedule the interviews. I do all the interview scheduling, but I have people that help me get the guests, get them booked, send them equipment, those kinds of things, prep them for the call. I bring them on, I do the recording. Then after that, I've got some folks that do the editing, that write the blog posts, that get it posted. I manage that team. So I started doing everything, but they started adding team members to it as we got better. So it's awesome having an editor to help you do your work. I'm not going to lie.
That's a good lead in to sort of the next question. In podcasting, what do you think the good, bad, and ugly is? What's the best part? What's the worst part?
Yeah, well, the best part is what we're doing right now, for sure, right? I can get on and talk for hours and hours and hours and hours. The worst part or the hardest part for a lot of people, some people say it's show notes. I actually don't think that's the hardest part. It's the editing part that's the hardest, to get that part right. And I think to get that part efficient, some people spend too much time editing. Some people don't spend enough time editing. And I think if you spend too much, you'll lose any value you get in it because it's burnt unless you have just time to burn through your pockets. You can waste a lot of time doing it. And I'm not sure you get that much lift, right? If you have 50 listeners, I'm not sure spending all that time editing is really that worth it. But if you don't edit the right things, you could lose some listeners too. Because you've heard those, right? I've listened to people, Bill, talk. They're doing a podcast and they'll be like, during the middle of the podcast, they'll go, wait a minute. You'll hear them take it. And I'm like, edit that part out. I don't need to hear you slurping your coffee kind of thing, right? And so it's one of those kinds of things. I think editing is the hardest part, and knowing how much to edit is key.
Let's see. Ask the podcast coach. Ask the Podcast Coach. There's not much editing there, is there?
No, no, that's live to the hard drive, literally in a lot of ways, and then we don't edit it. No, that's actually not really true. So sometimes we'll have technical problems, and like when the callers call in, and Dave, they can't hear us, we can't hear them. We're stumbling around. Dave does edit all of that out of the audio before it goes, but everything else makes it in. So it's mostly live to the hard drive.
Right. And sometimes when I'm driving, it depends what I'm doing. I'll pull up, like, Ask the Podcast Coach and listen to an old version on the smartphone. Smartphone.
Yeah.
So, driving on. So in podcasting, the good, bad, the ugly. You like, what was the ugly part?
Oh, the ugly part's the edits, I think, is doing the audio or video edits. Video is impossible, by the way. If you think you're gonna edit your video, you are sorely mistaken. It's so hard to get continuity in your video when it's done. We don't even bother in most cases. The audio is a lot easier. I mean, I can go out and make anything sound good in that. But I think for me, when thinking about podcasting, that audio editing is the hardest part.
Okay, I got a new question right here as we evolve in this program called.
Yeah.
And it's stuck on my screen. It said, how do you get your mind how do you get in the right mindset? That's a better way to say it.
Yeah. How do you get ready? Kind of do a podcast.
For example, I didn't use a checklist today. I got my windows open, so you might hear the truck outside.
That would be good. If it actually, I kind of like a little ambient sound from what's going on around you. I think depending on the podcast, it adds a lot of personality to what you're doing. So I don't mind that at all. I don't know how other people do it, but my prep, especially if I'm going to be the host, is an hour beforehand. I start getting ready. So there's a lot of things I need to get done to get the show fired up. I start up a second server and I open up Spreaker and I get Mixler going and we get the connection going with Google Hangout and bring up show notes. That hour for me is super important because I want to go into the show calm. There's nothing worse than getting ready to go at you got 10 minutes and you're live. We are live. All our shows are live. So I've got live audiences waiting for it to start, and I am adamant about starting on time. So I don't want to get in all rushed because I always make mistakes when I'm rushed. I would rather give myself too much time, although I'll tell you a story about that here in a second, than not enough. So one, I think planning is super key. A couple of weeks ago, I'd come in from a hard day and I was sitting down and I'd started an hour in advance and I was done in 25 minutes. And so I sent the link over to the host, the other guest host, and said, hey, log in when you're ready. No hurry. I put my head back. And the next thing I knew, my host was waking me up in my ears. I had fallen asleep at my desk waiting for my host. So that sometimes happens too. You get tired in the day or whatever and you have more time. Again, I'd still rather have more time than less.
Right now in Omaha, it's about, let's see, I don't know what time here. It's 6:30 here, so in Omaha it's 8:30. So we're doing this kind of late in the afternoon or evening. You had a long day.
Yeah. No, this is the best time for me, to be honest with you. Yeah. Oh, no, I'm totally conditioned. I've been podcasting for 5 years in this time slot. I always start at 8. So everything I do, in the most case, starts at 8. For my Gallup podcasts, we do one in Australia, Sydney. So Sydney, Australia. We do one in Singapore. We do one in Mumbai, India, Delhi and Mumbai. The Singapore and Australia ones, we start those 9 p.m. Central Time here. In India, we start at midnight. So there are times I have to go in. I'll go into work at 11 and knock out a podcast at midnight because that's noon for them. And so we just get you. I like the evening time. That's better for me. So during the day, we do our shows 1 p.m. Eastern, noon Central. So for work, I do those during the day, and it's okay. It works. I don't mind staying up late to or whatever. I'm not really staying up. I won't go to bed for another 4 hours, but
midnight.
It's I don't. That's pretty typical. I'm working on something with my podcast.
What time do you get up?
6.
That's about the same as me.
Yeah, I just don't ever sleep. People say, how do you get stuff done? I'm like, well, it's easy. You just don't sleep.
You ever take a nap?
Maybe once a week when the time comes up. It just kind of depends.
Yeah, 6 hours, you can get used to that. It's funny to listen to different people, especially the millennials. They talk, I've got to get 7 or 8 hours.
Yeah,
sleep.
I can't sleep in. I got stuff to do.
Yep, missing life. Very good. So next part is all technical about your questions, your systems, how you create your podcast. Now one thing that I've noticed, and I've listened to your shows, everyone seems to have a slightly different way to do a podcast. There's no magic way to do a podcast. There's a million ways to do it, record podcasts.
No, there really is. There really is. I think you got to go with what you're comfortable with from that standpoint. It's funny you asked that. I just recorded this week and released on
Mm-hmm.
our Home Gadget Geeks podcast, a little 20-minute segment that I recorded at the end in the post show of one of our shows. And I was just talking to the guys and I was talking about what I do. And I actually walk through my workflow. So if you head over to theaverageguy.tv, and I forget, it's going to be HGG 224. Okay, HGG 224. That's the podcast we just did recently where I talked about my workflow. So I give a detailed kind of version of that. But you know what? As I was doing that, there's two other podcasters that were listening, and they said, "Oh, we don't do it that way at all." So I think everybody kind of has their own workflow coming in. You just got to kind of do what works for you.
Right. And then again, I want to talk a little bit more about your workflow and how you do it. I'm up on your website right now.
Yeah.
And so we're going to talk about your workflow and what you would recommend to a new podcaster, how to get going, how to get started, other than, going to Dave Jackson's school.
Well, I always recommend that you listen to Dave Jackson. He's got a lot of materials. I am not a podcaster for podcasters. I hang out with Dave, right?
Uh-huh.
I always tell him, I'm not a podcaster, but I do play one on YouTube. One of those things Dave does very well is teach and train and educate people.
Right.
I've got a lot of experience, but Dave's a great guy for doing that stuff as well. But when we think about my workflow, and where would you like me? Where do you think? Where's the jumping off point to? Where do you want me to start? What kind of area do you want me to go into as we think about?
Well, what skill sets do you have to create a podcast?
Yeah, well, I think you need to be kind of outgoing, right? You're going to be talking on the mic a lot. That doesn't mean if you're introverted, you're out. I mean, there's ways of doing that, but you have to kind of want to be on a mic. You got to kind of want to communicate, and you got to want to kind of listen to yourself again. So if you can't do any of those three, you're going to struggle to podcast. And it's not for everybody. In our world of podcast coaching, we've kind of led them to believe anybody can do a podcast. That's true. Anybody could, but not everybody should. So if you find yourself, you've got something to say, right? If you find you interjecting your opinions into group conversations, if you feel like you're a know-it-all or you know more than most people, those are the signs that you have the podcasting sickness. And right. you might be good at podcasting. So it's one of those situations where you definitely, when you're going in, you definitely want to have something to say. Bill, it's super easy to get the first one or two or three of these done. Where it gets hard is in, beyond 7 or 8. It gets super hard at beyond 30. And so those are kind of the numbers. We say 7 and 30 are kind of cutoff numbers where most people pod fade at that point. So we always recommend list out 10 shows. Make sure you have enough to do 10. That way you break the 7 barrier. If you've got that, then go for it, right? If you get going with that. If you make it past 10, you're going to have to get super creative, and you may have to change your format a little bit to make it work. So there's some tricks and tips in there. But if you're going to be a podcaster, and the other thing is consistency, right? I mean, I think you got to be super consistent in what you do. We do a show every single week, come hell or high water. And I maybe miss 2 in a year while I'm on vacation, and like right now I'm 1 ahead. So I know you're the master at this too. You build up podcasts and have them available. You can release them on a regular schedule. Don't you think that's important?
Yes, I do. WP Tonic is my best show. It goes up every Sunday night. But to tell the truth, that's the only one that's average 100% consistent. But I've got a commitment to a group of people and a guy I work with who are in WordPress. And by the way, these guys that I work with, I'm convinced that I've seen them sort of come out of their shell. But they are sort of to themselves. They're on the computer all day. They're coders, programmers, PHP. They start talking, and it's really, I've seen them evolve.
Yeah.
I've seen them grow this year. I've been doing it a year with them. And we're getting, what's really nice to me, and I'm sure it happens to you, is I'm not the super tech guy. I'm pretty good in WordPress now. I build basic WordPress sites, but I'm not the PHP code, make it do amazing things, which I don't need it to do all those amazing things. But we just got a nice little email from a guy who has 15 clients, 15 web pages. He listens to our show, and that's what he does for a living. And those are what makes it made it worth the podcast.
Oh yeah, no, get that customer feedback when you hear that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
it's just awesome. But you mentioned a word called evolution, and that is super important in podcasting. That who you are when you start is not who you're going to be 25 shows in. You are going to get better. It's like anything.
Find your voice.
Yeah, you practice it, you find your voice, you find your rhythm, which I find is more important than voice in some ways. Every time I do a show, I open my show, I say, this is the Average Guy Network, and you have found Home Gadget Geek show number 225 recorded right. Now, I said that so many times, you get your you kind of had this condition. It also conditions your listeners. It's like having opening music, right? It conditions your listeners to get ready for the program. So when they hear that music, they think, "Oh, goodness," right? The program is about to start. There's no, I mean, it's no secret why radio has done this for years, right? They create sameness. Really, what listeners want is consistency and sameness. Let's talk about Dave Ramsey, right? Dave Ramsey has been incredibly successful in what he's done, and he says the same 7 things in every show, right? No, nothing's original. You know what's different? Different people call in and scream, "I'm debt free," right? And people love that, right? There's no magic to that. What's different is Dave Ramsey has personality and consistency, and Bill, people love that, right? And so I think it's super important. You will gain an audience. You'll think, "Oh my God, I've said that 8,000 times." You know what? People want to hear the truth over and over. They want to be confirmed, right? You're going to attract an audience that agrees with you, and they want you to confirm their belief in whatever it is, whether it's podcasting or politics or construction or whatever, right? That's why they're listening, is to be confirmed. A little bit of learning, but it's mostly to be affirmed and confirmed in what they believe in. So be consistent in your message as well. Don't go all over the place with it. Listeners will go flying away. Be consistent in your message.
You know, when you were talking about Dave Ramsey, I was thinking of John Lee Dumas. Has the same thing, says it over and over with just a different guest, and virtually it's the same thing every time.
It is. It's the secret to radio, guys. The radio guys have been doing this for 100 years, right? I mean, there's AM radio, talk radio. There's nothing new under the sun there. Now, what we get an opportunity to do in podcasting is have different formats, try different things, right? With an FM radio or AM radio station here in Omaha, we have maybe 3 that are talk. So that means 3 people get a chance to have their show. With podcasting, that's unlimited, right? That's the beauty of podcasting, is anybody can do it.
And it's slowly growing, and more people podcast. Now, Gallup, I'm going to go back a little bit. Gallup, You're talking about radio. Isn't Gallup sort of the folks who monitor who's listening?
No.
What does Gallup do now?
Not us.
I used
That's
to know
Nielsen.
Gallup. Nielsen.
Yeah, that's Nielsen. That's Nielsen.
Gallup
ratings.
polls.
Actually, back in the day, we did polling for Hollywood. So we would poll people and ask them what kind of movies they come out of movies, and we'd ask them what they like and what they like about the movie, and we took that to the producers. Long time ago in the 40s and 50s, since we did that. Today, from a polling perspective, we poll all around the world at least one time every single year. 96% of the world gets surveyed. So that's
what you do. That's
in
what
a
Gallup
sample.
does.
Yeah, that's what we do. We go into places and we get people's opinion. We say we're nosy, right? That's what we do. Really, our bread and butter is in the area of customer and employee engagement. So we ask questions in the workplace and of the customers of that workplace. That's our bread and butter. We also have a tool called the Strengths Finder. That's kind of where I work and do my webcasting. We ask some questions about you, and it spits out this report that tells you your top 5, the top 5 themes that things you're good at. It might be words like learner or activator or individualization or maximizer. And then we have a whole framework to help you be better, right? To be a better person, to focus on those things that you're good at, and then get people to help you on the things that you're bad at. That's kind of our philosophy. So our webcasts are around those products.
So the Gallup.com is your
homepage, Gallup.com
right?
is our news site. And then if you want to look at the Strengths Finder stuff, that's Gallup Strengths Center, all one word with an S. So GallupStrengthsCenter.com. That's where our Strengths Finder stuff is. If you want to see me again, you would go to our coaches blog. So you would go to coaching.gallup.com. And all that's just a blogger site that we've actually used for a podcast place. We talked about WordPress. We've actually made it work on Blogger, which is just crazy to think of that. That wasn't my choice, by the way. I would have gone WordPress in a second, but somebody got that thing started before me.
Right, and use WordPress.
Yeah, we use Blogger. No, we
use Blogger, Gallup.
Yeah.
But you use WordPress personally.
We do. I use, everything else is WordPress.
I won't try to pronounce the theme at the bottom right-hand corner of your page.
Of which site?
Of the one I have is The Average Guy.
Oh, yeah. So Mesocolumns is the name of the theme that I use for mine. It's a really unique theme, and what it allowed me to do is to get multiple headlines on a single page, right? And so because I have multiple podcasts, I didn't want the typical blog, roll that goes down and tabs across the top. I still have that, but if you go to theaverageguy.tv, you'll see Home Gadget Geeks in the upper left-hand corner, Cyber Frontiers in the right. Come down, Home Tips underneath that, and then I think my tips and reviews or something like that is below that.
If we had a Google Hangout, I would flip it up right now.
Yeah.
We could be doing this on Google Hangout, and it actually is pretty good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
That's what we use full time. I'm a full time Hangout guy. I don't mess with Skype.
so we could have
But
done this on Google Hangout, maybe. Yeah, we
sure.
should have.
Yeah.
Well,
Well,
we
we
should.
could have. No,
I'm
this
sort of.
works great.
I
Yeah.
started
This,
on Skype, but I'll tell you what, I've been using Google Hangout so much the last 6 months that I see the strengths are almost equal to Skype.
yeah. Well, Google's getting better at it, and they've been testing a whole bunch of things. We've been noticing some weird audio anomalies
Mm-hmm.
going on. Like when you're recording the show, the audio is okay, but when you get off the show, when you stop the recording, all of a sudden the audio becomes like Skype quality. And you're like,
Right.
oh, there's some great things going on here. The other day I dropped the user and I just kept recording. I had a guest on the end and then I dropped the guest and I kept recording and it clicked over to that better quality audio. And so I've got this mono cast of just
Uh-huh.
me, really good quality out of a Google Hangout. I think Google is listening. This is surprising. They've not been a lover of podcasting,
Right.
but Hangouts are perfect for podcasting. And so I think they're listening and continuing to, in little increments, improve the quality. So if you haven't tried the Hangout in a while, you might want to head back just to see how it goes.
I interviewed some of the top hosts for podcasts, and it's interesting to see how their perspectives. And one of them was, well, why do you record this like for a video like we're doing now? Because they're scared. I mean, you can do what you said and then turn that into a podcast, and it actually is I mean, it's just a media source.
Yeah. I think audio or video is better
Uh,
for the recording. Whether if you're not even going to use the video, still do video in
Yep.
your podcast because like I can see you, I can respond to you, I can see when you're going to come in. You can see when I'm going to come in. You see the expression on my face. You just make the engagement that you wouldn't normally get in audio only. I think it's better content when you have the video turned on. You don't have to produce it. Just let it go.
Yeah.
But have the video turned on.
Yep. No, I agree. I agree. And plus I like to use it just another source for SEO too, in that Google Plus
Oh, for
Hangout
sure.
type thing.
Yeah, for sure.
One last thing you mentioned, just a little hack, I guess we'd call it. Do you ever use the word hack?
I do. I do. I have some growth hackers that work for me. and so
Hackers, yeah,
we use it
that's
all
a
the time. Yeah.
millennium word.
Yeah.
Anyway, the hack would be I have a 286, and I just wasn't paying attention. I was in the middle. We had 7 people on Hangout or 8 people, all top podcasters, but not podcasters, but YouTube folks, not YouTube, but the WordPress, WP Tonic, and all that.
Yeah.
Anyway, and I just knew I was a little high, and I had to adjust it down. But I did I stuck it in YouTube, and just let them play with it and clean it up, and they fixed the sound.
Yeah.
It's amazing. YouTube is doing something.
They are. Yeah. If you're going to let them, they're going to process some stuff. If you have
Yep.
video that's a little shaky, they're going to
Yep.
fix that. They're going to change some of the colors. So, yeah.
That shaking, it does more than just the shaking. It's working on sound now.
Right.
It cleaned up the sound, so it's good.
Now it's pretty cool.
Yeah. So
Yeah. They're doing some stuff.
so that leads me to 2 things. I want to ask you about these, and we'll go on to the last section. Something I sort of discovered early on when I started podcasting. I found that I could use a Google Plus Hangout and go out and record things on site with a little mixer and my MacBook Pro. You just plug it in, put a little 920 or 930, and it really came out well. And it was free streaming, and it went right to YouTube, Google Plus Hangouts. I'd hook it into the PA system where I was. I've done it in politics. And it's come out really clean and pure. And it's basically free. And so I'll teach people to do this too. But that said, here's another thought that came to me. Instead of creating a podcast, go out and do what we're doing now, and then see how you want to use that content, and then shoot it over into iTunes or podcast. I was going to put Podcasters Home, which there's a webpage called podcastershome.com. I was going to create a whole new podcast and see if I get new noteworthy. But instead, I think I'm just going to interject this in with timelines because it's very similar.
Yeah.
And it's about podcasting because Rob from Lipson, Rob Welch, he said that a podcast about podcasters will never really grow other than a certain amount, certain number.
Yep.
So you might as
Yeah.
well mix it with other things.
Yeah, no, right on. You know, we suffer this on Ask the Podcast Coach because the niche is such a hyper niche that you're in. You know, I think Dave has shared those numbers publicly. We're at 300-400s, I think, that we get listens on that show. Not a lot from that standpoint. However, super engaged listeners.
Yeah.
That group of the community that shows up. I mean, this is Saturday morning, 9:30 Central, right? 10:30 Eastern. We're getting 30, 35, 40 people, guys and gals, to show up live on Saturday. Unbelievable. When we first started doing that, I thought Dave was crazy. I'm like, what are you doing? Nobody's going to show up to a podcast on Saturday morning. Are you kidding me? That's the best live show. I've done more at Gallup, but that's the best live
Yeah.
show consistently that I do.
I've caught 2/3 of those shows, and it's like having your coffee buddies on Saturday morning. That's what it
Yeah,
is.
it's crazy. It's a great, and it's the greatest crowd. I mean,
Yeah.
if you're a podcaster and you want to just hang out with podcasters,
And chat. Chat
yeah,
room.
the ones that are in the chat room, we have the best podcasters there.
Yeah.
That they may not be the most popular, some of them are, but they may not be the most popular. They're the most helpful,
They're all
right?
pretty good
And
podcasters, though.
they're great,
I know most all of them. They're all pretty
great.
good
Yeah,
podcasters. They
they're
all have
very
good
good.
sound and technicals. Very
Yeah,
good.
and they're just nice guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, and gals. I mean, Addie hangs out with us, and she's dynamite. So
Oh yeah,
that's
she's well
saying
known.
something.
She's starting to get
Yeah,
well known in the community.
yeah, yeah. She hangs out. It's great.
So we'll finish up on. I'm looking at your webpage. I sort of like what you do. So you have to do. Are those like widgets, and you have to do individual posts? They
So when you set up the theme is designed to go, right, left, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and I think I can get up to 10 on a solid page. I could line them up that way. So the theme's designed to do that way. It also sets the number of posts it shows. So like
Okay,
right
so
now I have
like a
2.
blog.
Yeah. Right now I have 2 showing, and then I could click on that and go in. When I click on any individual post on my front page, it goes into the blog form where I get long, long form, long and wide, and it goes in.
So it is a
I
blog, basically. It's just stacked.
Yeah, it is. No, it's absolutely a blog site. It just looks different. When I found this theme, I thought, oh, this looks different than anything I've ever seen. Meso, MESO columns, and I just really like it. It's free. The version I use is free, and everything works in it. You can see I'm using Simple Podcast Press if you go into any of the posts, and so I use all the plugins, and works great as a podcast. Just don't go copy me, because I feel like right now I'm one of the few
So
that
you know it
actually
is. It's unique.
uses it.
So
Yeah,
it's called The Average Guy. It's the Average Guy.tv.
Yep, the average guy, all one word.
Oh,
The average
I
guy.
mean the Average Guy.
.tv. Yeah, one of the things I think super important, and I think more people are doing it, but if you're a podcaster and you're not doing it yet, you can see I have a network jukebox on my front page. So while on the front page I don't have a player,
Mhm.
I thought it was really important to have have something there for them to click play. For the longest time, I used Audio Boom for this. So Audio Boom approached me a couple years ago and said, "Hey, we'll give you some free space and do some stuff." Audio Boom has a really good jukebox player where I could pull all the podcasts into one feed. Now I have to go out there and submit it to Audio Boom. Well, recently Blueberry came up with a really nice player that works, a network player, and so I've replaced the Audio Boom player with Blueberry. But I think it's, for me, I get a lot of hits on that player because somebody comes to the page and it just, boom, it stands out. Oh, there's all the podcasts, and they can see the titles of the first 5. So that might entice them to come in, right? We start left to right, and then we zigzag down, and that player is right when you make the turn to zigzag down. I get tons of plays on that little network player.
Now you have at least you have hundreds of podcasts here too. Right?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, we're Home Gadget Geeks is up to 225. Cyber Frontiers is a new one we started. We've been doing it a while, but it's at 25. And then I've got I've done a financial tech. I did a fitness tech. I did Spartan Radio for a year or so. So I've done a bunch of podcasts.
And I like your YouTube link. You got YouTube link on top.
Yeah, I've got everything across the top, including 2 different layouts for the live page, right? So we do both wide, if someone's on a wide screen and they want to get video and chat next to each other, or if they're on a tablet or a phone and they want to flip that thing up into portrait. Live 2 is designed for portrait, so you can get YouTube on top and you can get the chat room on the bottom. So I've thought through both of those.
Yeah. By the way, absolutely. If I had to do this again, we'd be doing this on YouTube or on Google Plus.
They can just head out to the averageguy.tv and look at it.
They're gonna have to look at it, but I'd be showing this because I'm looking right now at your subscribe. Yeah, is that a bunch of plugins?
Yeah, well, no. So that's one plugin. That's Daniel J. Lewis's subscribe and follow. Social
That's it?
subscribe and follow.
Wow.
That's all it is. And I've just extended it, right? So if you go to the subscribe page, he provides shortcode in WordPress to be able to take every single one of his links and put it anywhere on the site that you want. So I've modified it in a way to make it to get all the various subscription options: Facebook, Google Plus, Twitter, YouTube, email. And then each of the shows has an audio RSS, a video RSS, and as well as iTunes as well. So it was kind of, I think, a way to get those all separated in a way that was easy for the user. And the best part is, on a mobile device, these are super easy to click on. So
oh
if
yeah,
somebody
they're
wanted
big,
to click
easy
on,
to hit. I'll have to look. That's really slick.
Daniel J. Lewis, social subscribe and follow. It's not expensive. I think it's $30 or something like that. And besides Simple Podcast Press, those are the only 2 plugins I've ever paid for. Simple Podcast Press and social subscribe and follow. Worth their weight in gold for sure.
Oh yeah. Now let's talk about monetization as we finish up. We talked a little
Yeah.
bit about your website. I love your website. The more I look
Thank
into
you.
it,
Thank you.
I like simple, quick, flat sites at work.
Yeah.
And people get carried away. I work with all these like the programs that we don't need this like
Yeah.
20 plugins.
Yeah. You get creep. You get kind of like WordPress creep. And all of a sudden you got 100 plugins and you just got crap all over your screen. Right. And
Yeah.
listen, the truth is you need a good designer. And I didn't design these logos. Right. I have a buddy who did this for me, kept it very minimalistic and very simple, and allows me to put them in places like if you go to my site, there's a lot there, but it's all very coordinated, right? It's very easy to look at and easy to read. And I'm using colors to move your eyes around
Oh
on
yeah.
that. And I'm also using colors to identify what the podcasts are. So, that green that's on there is always Home Gadget Geeks, right? That red is always Cyber Frontiers. That yellow is always Home Tech Tips. And so it's just a way for people to identify. So then they see it on the site, it's a visual key.
Yep. And your top is very flat, and the bottom's not quite as flat. When you call
Right.
about flat look, I like the flat look because it makes your eyes move quickly to where you want to be.
Yes.
And then you have an Amazon link. Let's talk about how you monetize.
Yeah,
if you
that's
do.
the only way I monetize. So I do not.
That's-
All I have is
that's
an
sad.
Amazon. Yeah, well,
That's sad.
you know what? I started going down the paths of some of the other options, and Gallup
Yeah.
really pays me well.
Right,
So I
that's
don't
good.
need, right? I don't have to hustle for ads. And when I did a survey with my audience, overwhelmingly they said, Jim, we listen to you because you're ad free. And so I never gave in. I never went down that route to say I needed advertisers. My my Amazon link, $100 to $200 a month from that, and we turn those
That's pretty
dollars
good.
around. Yeah, I think so.
That's pretty good.
Well,
I know how Amazon, you got to work to get $200 a
you
month.
do. No. And so what I did, Bill, though,
That's
is
off
I
that
gave
one little link.
that one little link.
That's
right?
pretty.
And
That's
I
pretty
talk about it in
impressive.
the show. Here's what I did, though. I gave it back to the community. So I said to them, hey, look, we're going to call this the Average Guy Tech Scholarship Fund. And if you want to test something and write it up for the site, like if you want me to buy something for you, if you want to review it and write it up for the site or come on the podcast, I will buy it to you. I will ship it to you. You write about it, you test it, you get to keep it, right? It was a way for me to get honest reviews because that's the worst part about podcasting, especially in the tech world. These vendors send you stuff, and then it's super hard to get a review that's honest, from that standpoint. So this tech scholarship fund allowed me to fairly easily then maybe support up to probably 2 products a month that I could buy for my listeners and ship it to them, and then they would review them, right? And so you'll see now I've done that even for myself. So if you go down to my the section, I've got a section for that called Reviews and How-Tos, and I did a hands-on review with a Mahu Leaf 50 indoor HD antenna.
Where is that? Okay, it's down below.
Yeah, it's,
right below.
yep,
I got
down.
it.
It's
I
the
just
second
found it.
list
Yeah,
down. And then, so it was one of those things that's like, okay, I needed a new antenna. So I used the Tech Scholarship Fund, but I was true to my word. I wrote up a post and I talked about it on the show.
Mm-hmm.
And so we use that money primarily for tech stuff that gets reviewed. And I've bought cables. I mean, I've bought special cables. I've bought different little gadgets. We've sent home automation stuff to people. So it's, for me, I didn't want even that link to be. Now don't get me wrong. I've made network upgrades here in the house. I've purchased things with that fund to make the podcast better. I've been very clear to them. If you support this, it's going to go towards making the network better, which includes write-ups and network infrastructure. So that's kind of how I use it. And so we've gotten great support from the community to get that done.
So how is that HD TV antenna?
It's great, actually.
We don't. That's what we use in our house. We don't have cable. We just have broadband.
No, we cut the cable long ago. I've got 2 Silicon Dust HD home runs that do all the network. And then this little antenna, I had 2 big, gigantic metal ones up there that weren't working, and I replaced it with this little antenna, and it actually works. It's like $60 and super easy to install. So that's the beauty of that is I can purchase things like that and try them out.
Well, that's very good. We really covered the tech side, the evolution really well. And what I want to do is I finish up. We're going to go a little late. We're at 30 minutes. We'll probably get about 40 minutes today.
Sorry,
I'd like to
talked a
do.
lot.
In podcasting, I used to try to go. That's one thing I don't like to do now as much as I did initially is I like to go over 10. If you want to go over 10 minutes, a good conversation, just plan for it.
Yeah.
So let's talk about this new section, is motivation, mentoring, that sort of thing. We're going to talk about the keys to success. Now I got to need to look at my notes because I go back and forth. So I would say it's your 7 or 8 success tips, the things that you do.
Yeah.
And if you could name them off and then we'll talk about those things and finish up.
Okay.
So,
So
so
I'll
sort of your
roll through the
lifestyle.
list
Yeah.
and then we can go back and cover each
Yeah.
individual one. Okay. So I
Shoot.
do have 7. You said 7. And so I sat down
It can
and
be more or less.
no, these are the 7 that I came up with. So rule number 1, karma matters, right? Be nice to people. Number 2, it's still about hustle, right? Number 3, know what you're good at doing. Focus on that, right? That's number 3. 4, know what needs to be outsourced. Number 5, find and understand your audience. Number 6, take lots of risks and try things. Number 7, use automation whenever possible. That's kind of as I thought through all the things that make me successful in what I do and what I determine as successful. Those are the things that, and I ranked them in importance.
Okay, Jim, I like that. I like how you did that. My pen went dry, so I'll throw the watch. Here's the pen. It's
I'll
actually
send you
got
the
my
list.
wife's name on it. It's one of her real estate pens.
I'll email you the list.
So I want to go over those one at a time. Of course, we'll be editing this and putting these up at Podcasters Home and on Timelines of Success. So go over them each individually.
Yeah.
Let's talk about them.
So let's talk about number 1. So karma matters, right? I still think we live in a world where being nice to people pays off. And so whether you're in Facebook or on Twitter or they're hosts on your show or you meet them on the street, whatever, I still think as a host, as a podcaster, it's super important that you're nice to people and you do nice things for them, right? Pay it forward. You never know when that's going to come back. Be gracious in your forums, right? Be gracious on Facebook. Always assume the person didn't mean to write that thing, right? The last thing you want to do is alienate your audience by being crazy on Facebook, right? Do nice things. You never know, like even in the local setting, when you do something nice for someone and someone says, hey, tell me a little bit about whatever. And, I have a card for my podcast and I'm like, well, I'm a podcaster and this is, you never know how many local people you're going to turn into listeners. It's a crazy, I go to conferences and do these tech interviews that we do. We partner with a conference and kind of, we do bonus content and I invite those guys I interview back on my show. So I interview them there. And then the good ones, I'm like, hey, I'd really love to have you on my show. That is a guaranteed yes every single time, right? And I do nice things for them, and it's amazing how that comes back to the community. So karma matters.
And you call it karma. Do you ever get a feel that something's going to go right or wrong ahead of time?
Sometimes, yeah.
That's what I think about karma too.
Yeah.
I mean, what you put out comes back, and you have a feel of things going.
Pay it forward, right? I mean, it's that same idea. Always be paying it forward. That never goes wrong for you. Always pay it forward. I think it's super important. So that's number 1. Number 2, it's still about hustle. Dave and I, when we do Ask the Podcast Coach, we see these notes all the time from people who come in and they're like, how do I, hey, I've been doing my podcast for 3 months and I've hit a glass ceiling. That was one I read on, I think it was on the Google Plus group. 3 months, dude, you've got a ways. I mean, if you're thinking you're going to hit this thing in 3 months, well, it's been nice having you here. Enjoy your pod fade because that's exactly where you're going to go. It takes hustle. And there's nothing like, we just talked about, you and I stay up till midnight. We get up at 6, right? What are we doing? We're hustling, right? I am working every angle. I'm always improving my website. I'm always networking with people. I'm sending emails. I'm talking to vendors. I'm setting up interviews. I'm communicating with people around the world. And people at work are like, Jim, you are crazy, right? And I'm like, you got to hustle. If you want to do something, you still got to hustle, right?
If you're a dedicated podcaster, you don't have any time to do anything else. No. I mean, limited. You have time to do I do family things. Like Hot August nights tonight in Reno, we'll go out late at night.
I go and see movies and I do some stuff, but the majority of my free time is really spent with my craft, and whatever that is, I'm doing a lot of it, and I think about it all the time. So we
didn't talk about your family. You're married, have a wife, kids.
I am married, a wife, 5 kids.
5 kids.
I do have 5. Yeah, most of them are gone though. That's the beauty of this, right?
What's the ages?
So 26 to 16. Oh. And I was just talking to my 16 and 18-year-old. He's going to go off to the Marines here.
Good for him.
In a couple months. And I was talking with my daughter, and she's like, you know what, we're good. I mean, because someone was asking her, how is it with your dad doing all this stuff? And she's like, he's there when I need him. And so we're good with this.
5 kids, that's a lot of work.
Well, it's taught me a lot, right? I mean, they have taught me a ton. So some of the podcasting I do is about giving back parental and parenting advice and tech and how that stuff works. All my kids are nerds.
Yeah, good.
And they are. They're all tech nerds. So I think it's still about hustle. And in knowing what you can do and what you can't do from a hustle standpoint. Right? If you got young kids, and podcasting is going to be hard for you. Anything's going to be hard for you, right? Focus on those kids. I didn't do this when my kids, 10 years ago, I didn't do this, right? It wouldn't have been smart for me to do it. I needed to spend time with those kids then. They're pretty much grown. So now is a good time for me to do
One
this.
thing I'll say about what you just said, if let's say you have kids and you don't have the time to really go crazy and have that disease about podcasting, maybe try to get a $5 Lipson account, do one show a month, and just improve your craft. Leave it up on a website, keep it cheap, and that's going to grow over a period of years. When you have time, you can put more into it.
Yeah.
Don't give it up altogether.
I was listening to Mike Dell's podcast Help Desk today, and he goes, look, if you have an hour, do a 10-minute show, right? I mean, if you have 2 hours, do a 20-minute show. And that leaves you time. If you have an hour, don't do an hour show and you never get it done, right? Adjust the time for what you have. There's nobody will punch you in the face for a 10-minute show. Just do it. So it's one of those kinds of things where adapt your situation. If you really want to do it, do 10 minutes and see what comes out. So
next 3,
still about the hustle. Number 3, know what you're good at doing and focus on that. It's kind of a strengths finder concept in what we have, but so important that if you're bad at audio editing and you don't want to do it, outsource it. You're going to, get somebody else to help you with it. You can't write the show notes. Find somebody who likes doing that and help get those done, or find a way around it, right? Mitigate your risks in that sense. In finding new ways to do things. I always say, capitalize or exploit your strengths. Do what you do
Team
best.
up with somebody and do a podcast together.
Yeah, you know what, Bill?
That saves a lot of time.
I don't solo podcast. I am not a solo podcaster. In fact, 224, the one we talked about,
Right,
where
that was solo.
that's the very first time I've ever done solo, ever. It's always been with somebody else.
Was it hard?
Yeah, it was super hard, right? And I got in a groove.
A lot of editing?
No, not too
Really?
much. I got in a groove, and it was okay. I pretended somebody was in the room with me.
Okay.
So if you're watching the video, you'll see me look off like this when I'm doing the podcast, and I'm imagining someone over there and I'm talking to him, kind of deal. But it was one of those things. That's my very first solo podcast. I'm not good at it. I don't want to do it. So I don't. I always have guests. I've designed my podcast to always have either a co-host or to have interviews. It's just what I do. I know what I'm good at. So I stick to it. The converse of that is then know what you're bad at. This would be number 4. Know it needs to be outsourced. So if you can't do it and you have to do it, get somebody else to do it in a cost-effective way that, don't try and build your own servers. If you're not good at hardware, don't host your own stuff, right? Get somebody else to do it, right? If you're not good. So anyways, we talked about that. Outsource what you can. Number 5, find and understand your audience. This is super key when you start podcasting because you need to build that and people talk about this of knowing your avatar and all those other things. I just think it's important that when you first start podcasting, Jesus did this and it was incredibly successful. Find 10 or 12 guys or gals who are super engaged and reach out to them personally. That means phone calls. That means getting on Skype. That means doing video. That means emails. Pour your time into those 12. You will be amazingly surprised at how much value they will have in the future as you grow, because they'll actually start evangelizing for you. It's the power of exponential thinking.
Say that again. What was that point again?
Find 12 friends, right? Find 12 listeners and invest your time, 80% of your time in those listeners. Make them your most solid core, right? I said Jesus did this and he was a genius, right? This is the important part is there's going to be a core group around you. Give them 80% of your time. They'll take care of everybody else. They'll take care of, on Facebook or in your forums or whatever you decide to do. But you need to pour your time, 80% of your time into 10 or 20% of your listeners, and then let them reach out for you. It's once you start doing that, it doesn't feel right? But you have to. A lot of podcasters come at this. They don't want to talk to their audience. Well, guess what? You're never going to grow your audience that way.
Right.
You have to spend time one-on-one with a small core to get that done. Not a lot of people talk about this, but I think that's very, very, it's important in leadership. It's important in a lot of the things we do. As you get bigger, you got to get smaller. So one of those things, find and understand who your audience is and connect with them on a real personal basis. Number 6, take lots of risks, right? Just try things. Ryan Parker says, nobody's going to punch you in the face, and they won't. Right? If you make a
all
mistake,
over the internet. That was everywhere.
Nobody will punch you in the face.
Right.
Just try it. If you fail, great. Don't ever do it again. Right? It's people get too crazy about not trying. Find something that works and then stick to it. But you got to try some things to know what's going to work for you. So you have to experiment around, and so I'm, with my shows, 90% of it's the same all the time. And then I experiment around with 10% of it. Just kind of it's not perfect that way.
I think
but
you have
that's
to
kind
keep
of the
that
way
90% though. You're correct.
Yeah.
And, you and I listen to Dave's show. Dave really changes it up quite a bit, doesn't he? And I do too.
He takes a lot of risks. I love it.
Yeah. He
I
changes
love
it
it.
up.
But his core is very, very, he's there to help you with podcasting.
Right. That's
so
the
he's
core
trying
message.
different things. That's the core. He doesn't change it. You don't get on there and all of a sudden he's talking about tech.
Right.
Or like computers. That's just not what he does. He's talking about podcasting. And so
Yeah.
I think that 90-10 rule is a good one. Keep your core and then experiment around the edges to see because you might hit something. That tech scholarship fund,
Mm-hmm.
I had an Amazon affiliate link for a year and I got nothing. And a buddy, I wish I could say it was my idea. A buddy at work said, hey, why don't you try this thing where you do reviews and stuff? I thought, that's genius. We tried it and it was a huge hit. So you got to try those things, right? You got to see what works for your audience.
Yeah.
Take lots of risks and try things. And number 7, use automation whenever possible. Especially now, there's lots of ways to automate things in your workflow. And so if you can get your workflow down and get the computers to do stuff for you, by all means, offload as much of this as you can. There's 2 services. One's called If This Then That. That's the most popular one, itfff.com. The other one's a little lesser known, more in the enterprise space, but it's called Zapier, Zapier.com. Both of those help with web automation when we think about things that you can do. In Audacity, there's things that you can do. You can set up templates that help you in your audio processing, right? Get your folder. Dave did a webinar with Steve Stewart where they talked about getting your folder structure in order. Get your files all in one place so you don't have to go all over to find stuff, right? Make it simple. Find a workflow that works for you and stick to it, type deal. And so for me, my automation, it was a list of things that I have to do. It's like a pre-flight. You're a military guy with
Right.
me. You understand
Checklists.
pre-flight checklists. I have a pre-flight checklist that I do every single week because it's easy for me to miss a step. I must have, if you go to that post on 224 that I posted, I listed almost my entire workflow. There's a lot of steps there. And if it's not written down, you lose it. You miss things. You get interrupted. You got to go get something to eat in the middle of it and you forget, right? So write it down. In my book, that's automation. That's automating where you have a list of everything you have to do. And every show, when I'm done with every show, that list comes up and it goes to the left side of my monitor and it sits on half the screen. And I do the same thing every time. You think that's boring. Well, that's how you get perfect at it. Right? That's how you practice doing it and doing it well. That's one of those things where I'm very adamant about that. So for me, that's an automation step. It doesn't sound like one, but I think it is. It's doing it the same way automatically. And automatic is in automation. And so I believe that's an automation tip. So if you haven't developed a checklist for your post-production or even your pre-production stuff, think about doing that. Pilots do it because it's safe, right? There's a reason pilots have a pre and a post-flight checklist because there's a lot of steps and they'd forget them. You could too.
Right. Everything's a checklist. So that's very good. So automation, and that really fits into your show 224 about podcasting.
Yeah.
It fits real well.
Right on.
Okay,
right on.
one last question about your site, and I'll ask you about what you like to eat. That's it. I promise.
Yeah, no sweat. I'm good, man.
Dave always jokes. One last question. On your audio only, your player, you talked about your player. What are those? What is your player there? You've got
so that's Simple Podcast Press. That's Hanny's the new one from Simple Podcast Press.
Uh-huh.
And that allows me to have an audio player that's responsive in design. So I really like that. And then below it are some links to the download and iTunes and SoundCloud and Audio Boom. And all that's customizable underneath there. On a mobile device, it looks great, big for fat fingers, so you can push it. So I wanted to give my audience not only the ability to listen to it on the website, but to discover me in locations. I might be a little different than most podcasters because I believe my audio needs to be everywhere. And I have a complete list of all the places I put it on. If you have one you can't find on the list, let me know, jim@theaverageguy.tv, and I'll add it. But I'm in a lot of different places when we think about locations for that. But I want people to be able to listen to it, whether it's Podomatic or Audio Boom or Sound Shout Engine or Audio Mac or SoundCloud or any of the podcast.com, archive.org. I have to manually upload that. I do that.
Do you use Libsyn?
I don't.
What do you use?
No, I use, well, I mentioned earlier, I have
Oh,
a private
okay.
service that I use, Maple Grove
Oh,
Partners.
so they're actually, oh, that's nice. A lot of
They're
servers
my
won't let you do that. You know that.
Yeah, they're my
That's
host provider.
that's good.
And so, because I know him, actually the guy works for me, which is really, really cool. He has a small little web farm. In fact, he's
Uh-huh.
taking new customers. So maplegrovepartners.com. A little $10 plan will get you hosting for WordPress
Wow.
and hosting for your media files. $10 unlimited. He
Wow.
can do that because he's doing it for school. It's a little private, little private company he's put together. Got some dynamite service and amazing speeds. He's purchased Verizon FiOS
Uh-huh.
business, so he gets amazing throughput on his stuff. So I've been super happy with it. Now I have nothing against Libsyn. I would use Libsyn or Blueberry if I had to,
Right.
but I don't.
They're both good people.
They are
In
great.
both
No, they're great
teams.
companies for sure.
Filled with great people, both
Yeah,
sides.
yeah, yeah.
And what's the name of that company again, so we can put it in our show notes?
It's called Maple Grove Partners. And
Maple.
it's also,
What a name.
Maple Grove. It's the street he lives on. It's Maple Grove. And so he and his dad run the business, and they called it Maple Grove Partners. And he does most of the work, and is just a genius. The kid's 20, and he owns his own web farm, his own business. And he's optimized it for WordPress, which is cool. So his target is podcasters because I was his first customer, and so
and he's niching. And now he's got some other clients, and he'll grow.
yeah,
And wow.
yeah, and he's scaling out as he goes. I don't think he ever wants to be gigantic.
Does he do a
But
podcast?
Yeah, he does Cyber Frontiers with me. So if
Okay.
you want to, in fact, we've done some podcasts. If you want to hear about Maple Grove Partners, go out to theaverageguy.tv and in the search, just type in Maple Grove Partners.
Okay.
We've done a bunch of podcasts where he explains his network and talks about it. And so if you want more information, we've talked about it as well.
Well, Jim, I appreciate it. It's late. It's
No, we're just getting going, Bill.
Tuesday night, right? Tomorrow is 1MC. I go out, the one day I escape, I go out to 1MC, 1 Million Cups, which is part of the Kansas City group's coffee.
Yeah.
And they have it all over the United States. And we have a really good meetup here.
Awesome.
So
Good call.
that's my morning, and you've got to go back to work in the morning too.
I do, yeah. Busy week at Gallup, and so it's good. I never turn down opportunities to podcast, so I'm glad you invited me on the show.
But it sounds like fun work too.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. It's too much of it. It's too much to get done in a day. I almost always bring some home. I was working on a little bit. We use Yammer, which nobody uses, but we use Yammer as our social media, enterprise social media for our coaches. And I was just doing some cleanup on the sites right before the show here, so it never stops.
So I use Slack with my group's team.
You know what? We started using Slack. I love Slack. Threaded conversations in Slack, nearly impossible. And so a lot of my users are so used to having those threads like you see on Facebook,
Right.
where the conversations group together. Slack doesn't work
No.
that way. And so when I started because I wanted the coaches to move over to Slack with me, and they all rebelled. They're like, no, this is not going to work. Smart little tech boy. They were just average users. So I'm still using Slack for development teams and some things where we need that kind of functionality. And Slack's got some great integrations with other GitHub and some of those other kinds of those other pieces of software, but it's not Facebook.
Well, Jim, so as we finish off, we're going to sign off from the podcast, but just stay on for a couple of seconds on YouTube. So this will pull people, if you want to see the really secret stuff that Jim's going to talk about, what he's going to say for a couple of seconds, you got to come back to the website, which is going to be on Timelines of Success and Podcaster's Home, and look at the whole YouTube thing, or have that play in the background. So we're off. Now we're back onto just YouTube. Let you sign off. Any secrets? You look good. Green shirt.
Thanks. I feel good.
It gets more casual when I go off the podcast.
Oh, I know. Post show is always the best. When we do post show, even with Dave, even when I do it in my own show, Mike Uyghur is my co-host on Home Gadget Geeks. The post show is almost always better than the real show. You lighten up.
Listen to it.
Yeah, no, it's awesome.
Sign off too. Some people stop watching or sign off.
Yeah.
Not everybody, a few people.
No, you want to stay around. If you're ever on anything with me, there's always going to be a post show, and it's always going to be better than the show. So
I hope to be up Saturday morning. Saturday, I think.
Yeah, it's tough. You're on the West Coast. You're Pacific.
It's not bad.
Right?
7:30 because I'm making coffee. I get up at 6 something. I'm sleeping in, to tell the truth.
Yeah.
But I'm going to I'm going down to Southern California for a week.
Oh, nice.
The other thing too is I didn't tell you. WordCamp. I'm going to be at 2 WordCamps.
Oh, cool.
I kid you not, because of my podcast. I walk into the WordPress meetups, and people know who I am.
Isn't that great?
And I'm
Isn't
not
that a
the
great feeling?
WordPress guy. I'm just with these WordPress folks.
Yeah. It's a great feeling though. I think to get recognized that
Yeah.
way is a great feeling. And for me it's a little daunting sometimes because I'm like, do you really know how much I don't know? You know,
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
think you're on a podcast, so you know everything. It's like people think I know everything about podcasting. Well, I know everything that I know. I don't know if I know everything. And so, partnering up with Dave has been great because he comes from one camp. When we think about co-hosts in a podcast, I think this is really key. And Dave said this several times, and I totally agree with him on it. Don't find somebody who's exactly like you, right? Find somebody who's just a little bit off. I don't know if you want them exactly opposite unless you're shooting for that. But Dave and I come from different podcasting camps, right? He's got his camp, the group that the Rob Walsh and Todd and Ray and Daniel and
Right.
all those guys. I
Podcasters Roundtable.
never heard of those guys until like 2 years ago. Never heard of them. I've got my own separate guys, another thousands of listeners on this side. And we did it a different way. Now, not exactly different, but we weren't Lipson friends. I mean, I didn't even know what Lipson was until I met Dave McCabe. I met Dave Jackson.
Right.
Too many Daves in my life. And so
it's a popular name.
It is a popular name, especially in our age. So with Dave, he's got one way, but I can always offer, well, have you thought about this, right? I'm a Windows expert. We mentioned that earlier, right? I'm
We
a
didn't talk
Windows
about
MVP
10, did
for
we?
That's okay. I'll tell you the secret. This will be the post-show secret.
This is the secret of the post show.
The Windows 10, don't upgrade to Windows 10 right now.
I
That's
won't
the
do
secret.
it. I was going to do it.
Don't do it.
My wife
Do
even
not
said,
give
"Why
it
don't
a
you
month."
take that?"
Let me tell you why. So Microsoft's still struggling, especially with older machines, struggling with all the drivers. They've got all the drivers solved for newer machines within the first year or two. But there are some older machines that are just barfing when you get older drivers on there, and Windows 10 doesn't have the right drivers. And for the average guy, they don't know how to uninstall and reinstall the right drivers from the manufacturer, if it's even available from the manufacturer any longer. So they're working their way down the list, fixing driver issues, adding drivers in from Windows 7 and stuff like that, and fixing them for Windows 10. So if you have old equipment, especially, give it a month, give it 2. It's free for a year. You don't have to be on it. If you're happy with Windows 7, stay with it for now. If you want to get on Windows 10, it's coming, right?
It's got to be better than 8.1 because we had the driver problem. That's why we went back.
Yeah, well, to be fair, 8.1 update, the newest.
Right.
If you had everything new, that's the best version of 8 of all of them, right? If you started with the original 8,
right.
Oh, Steve Zasowski, bad idea, right? It was terrible. But it got better. Right now, I'm running Windows 8.1. This is what I'm talking to you
Really?
on.
You're using it, huh?
It looks no different than Windows 7. I've tweaked it in a way, not doing much, but just the way I've set it up. I've tweaked it away. I never use the touch stuff, and that's all hidden and whatever. So you don't have to use any of that stuff. So really, 8.1 update, the newest update, you have to have that because that's got all the good Windows 7 stuff in it. When you get to 10, the menu is different, a little bit different. The start menu goes back to a Windows 7 hybrid with the big start for touch. Those buttons now come into the start menu when you're in desktop mode. When you go to tablet mode, so say you have a convertible,
right? Which is
you
one
go
thing
to
I
tablet
really
mode,
like about what they're
get the
doing.
big touch. Yeah, it's great.
I almost didn't go when I got back from them finishing up in the military. Almost did not go. I always wanted to do it because I was doing design build construction my whole life on PCs, but I always wanted to go to try a Mac again. And I got into Mac and I forced myself into Mac in 8.1, but it was hard. I thought Microsoft was actually going the right direction using the same operating system, at least interface, on all their platforms.
Yeah. I like Mac. I'm not going to lie. I can interchange between the two.
That's
Even
good.
though I'm a Windows guy, I know there's enough people using Macs that I kind of need to know. There's no secret what my phone is right
we didn't
there.
talk about that. I use the iPhone.
Yeah.
Sounds like
Oh, my wife's a little concerned.
we're
about
after
me.
the show. You know what? That was good. The secret was Windows 10 advice.
Yes, Windows 10 advice.
Stay around.
Don't do it.
Go to YouTube to find Jim Collison's Windows 10
Don't
advice.
upgrade now.
That's a good way to finish.
Yeah.
Aloha.
Is that it? We're done?
Yep, done.